All right. Hello, Facebook. It is Dr. Bryan and Heather, and we are on today's podcast. So, uh, it was my idea this month being Valentine's and all that fun stuff. I thought we talk, and that's related to the heart, right, and love and all that fun stuff. Let's talk about the autonomic nervous system. And so, this is such an important part of our nervous system that really influences everything. It influences digestion, emotional regulation, immune function, sleep. I mean, this thing it's a big deal. And I would say 3 out of 4, maybe 4 out of 5 kids that I see in my practice have some sort of dysregulation in this. And there's a variation, a spectrum, if you will, of how dysfunctional that can all be, but it's a very important thing. And so let's dive into this, Heather. So, boy, I don't even know how to dive into this. This is such a both of us can talk about this forever. So this is an issue. But okay, so let's dive into it. So there are 3 parts of this. All right. So there's a fight or flight. Okay, we'll jump into that. There's rest, relaxation, healing, and there's socialization. So all parts. And so, Heather, let me ask you this. What are you seeing in your clinic? So if I see 3 out of 4, I'm assuming you say the same numbers, maybe higher. What do you see in your offices?
Yes. We talk about the body-brain connection all the time, and this really kind of puts the science and biology behind it. One of the things, kind of a very easy way to explain it to people is talking about how we have the gas pedal in our brain that's responsible for motivation. I want to do well in school. I'm going to study. I want to be good at sports or music. I'm going to practice aside from when I'm forced to practice. We also have the brake pedal in the brain, and that is let me pause and think about this before I speak and act. So a lot of kids who have social emotional challenges, sensory struggles, are all gas pedal, and they're kind of missing the brake pedal. It leads to impulsivity, risky behavior, but it also leads to an immune and autoimmune situation that's not working, and understanding that if I can't use my executive function if I don't use my conscious thoughts and pause and think through things and independently problem solve. I just react.
Yep.
And we're going to talk about why that is, but that is prevalent. And then you see the physical signs associated with it that might be bloating, diarrhea, a lot of digestive issues, difficulty with bedwetting, or during the day, beyond where that's expected to be kind of expected, and on and on. Kids who are always have clammy hands, they're always hot, body odor at a young age, a lot of signs of these autonomic struggles. But you compare them, not compare, you can pair them with the academic, social, emotional, behavioral struggles they're having, and it all goes together.
Absolutely. I would, and to your point, like there are these signs, kids come in, their hands are all sweaty, right? Or the body odor, or we notice that one of the big things that I don't think is accounted for very often, or maybe not recognized, is when they go into situations with lots of people, right? Like a classroom or something like that. And so many of these kids walk in, I would say a vast majority of them walk in with their fight or flight system kind of stuck on, right? The gas pedal is thrown on. Most don't come in with the brakes on, but I do see a couple of them. Yeah. But it's your brain at that point is in fight or flight, or freeze, right? So there's actually 3 parts to that. So yes. Fight, run, or freeze. And so you'll see these kids walk into a classroom and all the sensory input, right, overwhelms them. Their brain is kind of in this fight mode. Like, is there a tiger? Do I need to run? Do I need to fight? Is that person, are their social cues friendly or foe? And if we're not efficient with processing other people's facial expressions and body movements and tone of voice, Johnny might punch somebody, but the brain is queued up to do that, right? It's not that Johnny's a bad kid or wants to fight. His brain is just in this state of, I need to fight, run, or freeze. And Johnny does a freeze. So that's what we're seeing, right?
Absolutely. The way I talk about it with parents is, we have all of this external and internal sensory information that we're processing.
Yes.
External are the 5 senses you learn in preschool. And then we also have internal sensations. Am I upright and balanced? Do I feel my body the way I'm supposed to? All of that information comes through the brainstem, and the guard dog of the brain, the amygdala, says, am I safe? We need that because if I have a stranger coming up on me in a dark parking lot, I want my adrenaline to kick in. I want my muscles to be stronger, to be faster, for my breathing to open up. We have all these bodily changes that happen, but the brain cannot tell the difference between real and perceived threats. So if I am overwhelmed with sensory information or it's distorted to me, the amygdala tricks these kids into thinking, no, you're not safe. And it just hijacks everything. It doesn't even make it to the parts of our brain where we can pause and think through things and problem solve, instead of being reactive and having emotional outbursts or screaming or melting down tantrums. A lot of anger comes from this. The emotions are the relay systems between our sensory input and what we do with it. So if I'm emotional or stressed out, that's why how many times your phone rings one day doesn't bother you, and the next day you're just like, because you might be a little heightened because you're already a little stressed out. You may not be in fight or flight, but you're even more reactive typically to sensory input. Some days the lights are too bright. Sometimes it's too dim in here. Sometimes the radio in the car. How was I even hearing that yesterday? Next day you're like, man, how was I listening to it so loud yesterday? But these kids, it's 24/7. So their sympathetic portion of their autonomic nervous system is kicking in and going into fight or flight response. They don't have. And the other thing is it really impacts our memories. There's been a lot of talk about confirmation bias politically. I'm not getting into that stuff, but I'm just saying I already believe something. So now let me find other things that substantiate what I choose to believe is true. But when we are in an anxiety mode, our brain tends to even sort of seek confirmation bias right then. Like, I have a presentation tomorrow. I'm nervous about it. The brain starts recalling all kinds of other things that have made you nervous or anxious. I get anxious because I can't fall to sleep. So now I'm anxious about not sleeping, which keeps me from sleeping that night, So the sensory system is closely linked to this autonomic nervous system. And we need the parasympathetic response is after I fought off danger, I go and rest and digest and restore this energy mode. So sometimes if you have kids who are seemingly apathetic, lazy, fatigue easily, laying their head on the desk, their parasympathetic system is trying to balance out all this fight or flight stuff that's going on. They are churning. And just because you're not experiencing fear right now, it doesn't mean that the parasympathetic system knows how to regulate and tell your body when you can release your bladder, when you can't. Now it's time to digest food. When we're in a fight or flight, we don't digest food as well because all of that, like, we don't have to do that right now. Let's put all of our blood flow and oxygen to what we need. It impacts working memory. We've talked before about how parents need to have settling time if they're getting escalated, because your pupils will dilate and kids will know you have a different look in your eye. You may have larger gestures, talk faster, more words, and it overwhelms them even more. And they feel that they respond to you as if you're a predator because you are that tiger Bryan talked about. But that, if my pupils are dilated, then I'm more sensitive to light, and then I have sensory overload more. So it's sort of a vicious cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we got several people watching, so please ask some questions. Okay, this is about answering questions for you all that we receive a lot. So if you have a very specific question or just a question in general, please ask them. But I love what you said, because if there's a predator out there, you're being hunted by a tiger, wolves, whatever, your senses go into high alert, right? They're keen, your ears are more sensitive, your eyes are more sensitive, right? Your touch, you're just more alert. And to go into a bright room could just trigger you. I mean, your system's already on alert. So these kids are stuck in this fight or flight, this vicious kind of cycle, and we go into a classroom, bright lights. You're not supposed to sit and pay attention when you're in fight or flight. This is about fighting or running, not learning. All right. So these kids come in there and they don't know why, because it's not like they think they know there's no tiger there, there's no wolf, but their brain is in that mode. And so the bright light, the teacher's talking to them, memory is essentially shut off, right? You've been stressed out before. You can't remember what was going on. It's one of those things, and they're overwhelmed. And then think about it, fight or flight. Your brain's like, okay, you got to move, buddy. Right? You need to get out of danger. And so then now they're wiggling, not paying attention, and they look disruptive, or they look like they don't want to pay attention, or maybe that they're not interested, right? I mean, this could be something that the kiddo can be interested in, but if your brain's in that fight or flight, it's gone. It's not there. Your brain is not designed to do this.
Yeah. A perfect example of what you're talking about, I just love this, is let's say that I have an issue with auditory processing and knowing where sound is coming from.
Right.
We think about distorted messages coming in, but sometimes I hear it correctly, except that I don't perceive where sound is coming from. So you're like, who cares? Well, if you're driving down the street and you hear a siren and you're like, you're panicking, I got to get out of the way, and I don't know where this emergency vehicle is. Imagine that all the time. If I don't know where sound is coming from, I am trying to listen to my parents. I'm trying to pay attention to the teacher. But when I do that, I don't know where sound coming from. I hear every scooting desk in the class across the hall, every sniffle, crinkle, stomping, and gum chewing. And so I listen to the teacher, her volume goes up, but so does all that extraneous noise. That is so overwhelming. So I'm either going to lash out, have an emotional moment, or I can't listen to anything because I can't pick what I listen to. And then I shut down. And like you said, then it can look like apathy, disinterest, when really it's like, I'm overwhelmed. And this is how I'm protecting myself right now. Fleet, when we talk about fight or flee, it doesn't necessarily mean running off like we would from a tiger. It can be, I'm shutting this out.
Right. There doesn't have to be physical distance.
That's right.
Yep,
That's
absolutely. Right. All right. So we have a question from Clark. Do you want to answer that for us?
Hi, Clark. Can a lower sense of body awareness also affect behavior socialization? Absolutely. Yes. That is a fantastic question. Thank you, Clark. Yes. Body awareness, I mean, that is part of our internal sense. And by the way, if kids have issues feeling their bodies the way they're supposed to, if you have space invaders out there, kids who don't pick up on nonverbal language, body language, tone of voice, facial expressions, there's a decent chance that their interoceptive sensory system, when am I hungry? When am I full? When am I thirsty? Is also off kilter. So I want to throw that out there because that relates to the organs that the autonomic nervous system takes care of. But if I don't feel my body the way I'm supposed to, I may be aggressive or rough and not realize how rough I'm being.
Right.
The way we learn our socialization skills and how to behave with others and all the rules of engagement is if I'm connected to my emotions, I know what happy feels like emotionally. I also feel my face smiling. I feel relaxed body posture. Bryan and I are playing on the playground. I see that in him. This is good. We're getting along. It reinforces the positive socialization and behavior we want to. If I do not feel my body the way I'm supposed to, and Bryan is furrowing his brow at me or kind of tensing up or like telling me to stop, that goes right over my head because I don't know what my body's doing. So if you're speaking a foreign language that I don't speak, and a lot of kids can memorize rules of we share, we do this. Like these are the class rules or the house rules, and I can memorize those. But that's not a powerful enough motivator for the correct socialization and behavior. What's a more powerful motivator? I do this because the class rule says we do, or I do it because socially, emotionally, I'm growing a sense of self, and therefore I am able to really get how my actions impact Bryan, and I don't want to hurt his feelings. I want us to be friends, so I do the right thing for that reason. That's why I'm not saying not to have rules. We need the rules, but that's not enough to make it stick.
Right. There has to be some plasticity and understanding of how the rules apply and when they don't apply, right? It's not just always a hard set rule. And then there's social rules, right? That we need to understand. And when you're in that fight or flight, that a lot of the times that gets thrown out the window. And let's talk about, I want to jump in a little bit into this because you've talked about, and I think it's great. So, and this kind of goes with not body awareness, but internally what's going on, right? So you mentioned the enteric system, so the GI system or the gut system. So one of the things that I know is common with my kiddos is when this system is not functioning the way it should, we have what we call gut permeability, meaning larger proteins like gluten and dairy start leaking in, and we get these inflammatory responses, maybe not as high as some people would think, but it's this low level inflammation immune response. And if you've ever felt kind of icky, right? Like you're not like, I don't have a full blown cold or something, but there's this, I feel achy. That's what I imagine they kind of feel like. They just have this low grade inflammation all the time. They don't feel great. So let me ask you this question. The gut, how does that influence behavior in this sense? Like, does it play a role? Does it impact the autonomic nervous system?
Yes. I mean, everything in our bodies and our brains are so intertwined. I mean, we talk about brain communication. We must have really strong connections, superhighways in our brains. But the body brain, Harvard Medical School says the gut and the brain are so intertwined, they should be considered one system. I mean, the limbic system, the same system in our body that is our emotional responses are the same cells we have in our gastrointestinal system. If I am in an anxiety or a fear mode and my fight or flight kicks in, that shuts down digestion. When I don't we have that. We've talked so many times about how we learn first in our sensory motor system. These kids are misperceiving those signals. If that impacts my coordination of movements, which impacts my coordination of thoughts and problem solving, it also impacts intestinal motility. Even those muscles don't work to break down the foods. Even if my tone of my muscles is good, when I'm in a fight or flight response, the body is like, we are preserving all of that. We are focusing all of our resources on getting away from danger. And nutrient absorption does not happen. So kids can even be eating, you're going out of your way, having these healthy diets. But if the body is not breaking it down correctly, you just talked about the permeability, those foods can leak out without the nutrient absorption. And our foods are the fuel for our brains. And if we don't eat, even if they're the right foods, but our bodies don't know how to process them, inflammation occurs. And there's a huge tie with this, and depressive symptoms, anxiety symptoms, just overall sense of sometimes malaise or decreased well-being. So, and if you don't feel good, I mean, any of us out there, when we're sick, it's harder sometimes to be in a good mood. Physical well-being and emotional well-being. We've talked about how exercise, we know that it releases endorphins. Fight or flight system, if that's out of whack, I get the wrong chemical messenger sending messages at the wrong times. And then it impacts my emotions, and emotion precedes behavior.
Yeah, I love what you said. So when you're in this fight or flight, what the brain does is it stops the intestinal tract, right? Just kind of halts that all, right? Digesting this is not important if there's a tiger 50 yards from me, right? But not only does it stop it, right? So we don't have to break down. Some of it might be leaking out because of chronic stress, right? But then, these kids, I don't know how many kids I have that don't go to the bathroom for like 5 or 6 days. You're like, oh my gosh. And that food is just kind of rotting in there. And so we get this immune response too, because the lymphatic system, which if you don't know what that is, we'll jump into that sometime. But I call it like the sewage system of our body, right? Where there's bacteria and viruses, and it's kind of our body's trying to get this all out, right? Is being bombarded. And so, I mean, it messes with hormonal levels, makes you inflammation. I just feel so bad for these kids. But I love what you said, because I think it's so important, because I hear kids are being put on medication to help them move their bowels on the regular. Like they make it's common is what I'm trying to say here. It's common. It's not normal. It's common.
Right.
I feel bad for them because, their body is sensing all that, right?
Yes.
You need to break this down, and this is sitting there and it's not being utilized, and I'm not getting the nutrients I need. And so just kind of, this is so important, parents. If your kiddo is struggling to use the restroom, this is a system that you must look at.
Yes. And if they are going all the time, like way too much, and like they were potty trained, and now they're not anymore. They've started school. They're around the much more fray than they were at home, and they get put on these medications, and then they have dry mouth, and they don't have tears, and then that frustrates them. That they can't sweat, so then they overheat. I mean, you got it. The medicine is so many times. I mean, there's a time and a place, but so many times these things are Band-Aids. Like, why did they start wetting their pants again, or why did they never get potty trained in the first place? And
then I also want to point. I love what you said. Okay, yeah. So love what you said about the medication. I'm not saying that you shouldn't use it because you need to go to the restroom, but I had kids that are on there for months and months and months, and it's ill-advised. But one of the things when you mentioned wetting, right? Like they start, having accidents again. One of the things is you have to realize when your brain is in this fight or flight, it's not thinking about, do I need to use the restroom? And so you get these kids who, like, I didn't know I had to go to the bathroom.
Right.
I didn't know. And so you're like, no, you knew. No, they're not. They're disassociated. Their brain's not thinking about, excreting this. It's, I need to get away from a tiger. And so I hear a lot of parents get frustrated. They're having accidents again. Why did this start? Or, what's going on? And they literally have, it's a disconnect, a complete disconnect between the sensation of I need to use the restroom and I need to run. And so there's just this complete and utter disconnect.
Yeah, that's one thing to understand, that the sympathetic, the fight or flight part, and the rest and digest, and the parasympathetic system. In most cases, there are exceptions to this. They work in opposing manners. The sympathetic system is stimulating a lot of, let's take action now. The parasympathetic is inhibiting responses. So if kids aren't balanced and they're in that sympathetic mode too much, and it's like shutting down the bladder.
It's a new word. We just found it.
Yes, that's in the new diagnostic manual. Check it out. There is just like we talk about brain imbalances that lead to cognitive and learning and social emotional behavioral challenges. There is just, they can't get it quite right on when they feel it, whether they hold it or they didn't even sense it till it's time to go right then. So that basically when you're in a fight or flight response, your body, your hypothalamus, it is telling you to shut down the system right now. Hyper arousal in these areas, and that sometimes, but the kids stay in it so much that then even when they're in rest and digest, it just doesn't get recalibrated.
Absolutely. We have a comment. So it says failure to thrive in infants is also an example of this and a probable future issues as breast milk has large proteins and carbs in it. So gluten, dairy are large proteins. Sorry, they are stuck in a sympathetic overdrive from the beginning. Yeah, so this can start in infancy. You can see this, what we call dysautonomia or dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system in the beginning. Right, we'll have failure to gain weight. We'll have a lot of GI issues sometimes, or we'll have a lot of spit up, abnormal amounts of that. So you can actually see it right in the beginning where they're having trouble breaking down the foods because that system is already in overdrive. Great point. I don't know who that was because it just says
that was excellent.
Thank you for that comment. Appreciate it. All right. So we're about 24 minutes in. We've talked a lot about the sympathetic. Okay. Let's briefly talk about the parasympathetic. And that's the counter. Okay, so let me explain to everybody. You get up in the morning, sympathetic kicks in. Okay, gets you up out of bed. All right, you get a shot of cortisol and all that fun stuff. Then it should start coming down, and we'll get a little parasympathetic. We'll start digesting breakfast, so forth, and we kind of have this cyclic cycle of these two systems kind of balancing each other out. Right. So the parasympathetic can also happen in us, where I've seen it where it's usually in adults, but where they're so burnt out sympathetic that they're only in parasympathetic mode. So there's essentially no arousal system in them. They're very lethargic, or maybe they look lazy sometimes. I know you mentioned that with one of the kids where their parasympathetic's trying to like do its job, and they look like they don't care, or they're always complaining about fatigue, or maybe they look lazy, but that's not the case. Their system is just in dysfunction.
Yes. Yes. And so one thing to keep in mind is even if you even look at sleep patterns, I mean, that's when we want our parasympathetic system kicking in. And if our kids have been in overdrive, the parasympathetic system may have trouble kicking in. Our heart rate variability, like the steadiness, the rhythmicity of our breathing, there's a lot of studies on how that can lead to insomnia. Do your kids have difficulty falling asleep? That might be that the parasympathetic system is not kicking in the way it's supposed to. Or do they fall asleep and then they wake up? So look, even the patterns of, there's a big difference between I can't fall asleep at night and I have racing thoughts. You really want to work on slow, deep breathing, maybe progressive muscle relaxation, guided imagery with them, or are they having trouble staying asleep? We've talked before about the primitive reflexes. And it's important to note that if kids have the survival mechanisms we're born with, and one example that we've talked about before is the spinal galant. Anything that stimulates the lower back stimulates the hips. Another example of the somatic system, the sensory system, messing with what stage of arousal or inhibition I'm in. So the bed may be bothering them. The covers, even if they lay on their side or their stomach, the covers are getting them. So that is, again, the sensory system impacting their state of arousal.
Oh, I love what you said with, so it could be right. So it could be anything, right? Your kids, I don't like long sleeves, or I don't like pants, because we have a heightened sensory system, right? That's in fight or flight. But I love what you point to the bed, right? Like, I don't think this is thought about well, or thought out, right? Maybe the sheets are actually, like, that system is so so alert that even sheets trigger the system even to an alert. I love that. I think that was big. I love that because I think it's so overlooked.
It is so overlooked. But it impacts, we call them neurotransmitters, but they are chemical messengers that connect messages from one area to another area that are impacted when my body doesn't know when to be in rest and digest and when to be aroused. And serotonin can be lower. We've talked about melatonin before, very neuroprotective chemical that is often awry if the brain and brain are not communicating properly, natural occurring chemical in our brains. But that is, I have had kids who, come in, they're failing all their classes, and parents like, they couldn't care less, and they're not wrong. But there's a reason. It's because I was in overdrive and trying for so long, and then now I am all rest and digest, and burnt out, absolutely burned out. So it's just not laziness. I know we say that a lot, but it's important to know that the body is worn out. It takes a toll on your mental well-being as well as your physical well-being. If these two systems, we're talking about fight or flight and then rest and digest, but knowing that these systems are working 24 hours a day, and there really has to be, it's a dance. They have to have good choreography together. And kids with neurodevelopmental struggles, they need some dance lessons, on these systems. They're not floating across the floor.
The dance partners aren't in sync, right?
That's right.
They're not in sync. So it's we have a professional dancer and an amateur, and they're not playing well together.
Right.
But, you brought up primitive reflexes, and this is one of the ones I wanted to bring up. I love the galant, absolutely, but the moral reflex. Seeing it a lot. When you have these primitive reflexes, I'm telling you, it will kick this system on, and the dance partners are not playing well together. And this ultimately is leading to GI issues, attention issues, focus issues. You can go both ways with immune dysfunction, right? You can have the kid that is always sick. And then you can have the other end of the kid's like, I've never been sick a day in their life. Never been sick. And so you have to look at it. There's a beautiful in-between balance in between of, not getting too sick all the time and never getting sick, right? And so this is very important when we look at all this stuff. But
I want, just real quick, since you mentioned the Morrow, it's also called the startle reflex. And just so people know what that is. Like in infants, their bright lights come on or loud sound suddenly, and how babies will throw their hand and like, what was that? What was that? That's typical in an infant. But when that sticks around, you can imagine how I'm startled by things that typically you're not startled by. And it's a very huge concentration issue, because every single thing that happens, what was that? What was that? But that's what we do when we're really in danger. We are honed in on the details that put us in danger, and we ignore the rest. We're not going to be saying, look at that pretty tree over there. We are honed in on the danger. That's exactly what babies do. Where's that light? What was that sound? But a lot of our students get stuck in that, and it leads to impulsivity and emotional outbursts and concentration issues, and a lot of times emotional immaturity and things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a big reflex.
Yeah.
I've seen it in 40-year-olds. I mean, trust me, you think, oh, it's an infant, right? The primitive reflex should be gone within the year. No, I'm telling you, lots of these kids have it. Lots of these teenagers have it. Some of their parents have it. And so, and when you have these primitive reflexes, your autonomic nervous system is going to be shot. It's going to be in disarray. So very important. Always need to check those. I check them all my kids, and I check them in a lot of my adults too, especially if I suspect that. So, all right, we're at the 30-minute mark. I don't see any more questions coming through, but if there's another question, please, or comment, please share those. Thank you both for that question, the comment, loved it. Heather, anything that you want to end with?
I don't think so. I if your kids are having physiological signs, they're not sleeping, they're having trouble with continence, they seem apathetic or fatigued all the time, or they're very impulsive, having trouble with attention, don't focus on the symptom. Ask yourself, why are they doing this?
Right.
You must get to the root and address the foundational issues for better development, cognitively, socially, emotionally, behaviorally, academically, quality of life, and physical health.
Absolutely. And adults, we see it in you too. It's there. Yes. It can happen to us too, especially if you've been head trauma. Lots of my former collegiate or high school dad. I was a college linebacker, got hit in the head a lot. It comes up. I've seen people with car accidents. It comes up. So you're not immune from this, no matter your age. And so very important to have this checked, especially if you're having a lot of this, because lots of adults have GI issues as well. So, all right. So Heather, somebody wants to find you. How do they find you?
Instagram or Facebook at The Hidden Churn. That's my professional page. And then Brain Balance of the Woodlands, Katy, Mansfield, and South Lake.
Awesome. And listen, Heather loves to answer questions. I'm speaking for her on this one, but I have seen her answer all the questions. So if you do have a question specifically for Heather, please ask. She's here to help. She wants to help these families, and this is for you all. So please ask. I'm happy to answer questions as well. So if you have any questions, please ask. I'd love to answer them for you. You can find me at Dallas Synergy Chiropractic on Facebook and Instagram, or you can call 972-387-4700. All right, next week, we're going to be talking about some ways that you can influence the autonomic nervous system, right? So I think this is going to be a fun conversation. Not going to be so in depth into the symptoms, but what can we do to proactively help us balance our autonomic nervous system? All right, I don't see any questions. Heather, thank you so much for your expertise and your input into all this. Go find Heather, follow her on all her pages. She has other podcasts that she's part of, so she's always giving out great content. Ask her questions. She's happy to answer. So am I. Otherwise, we will see you next week.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.